Welcome again to From the Fireside. Today we're going to read another chapter, Chapter 5 of 9/11 Act 2. The chapter is entitled Starting Investigations. The NTSB was notified and just before 2 started dispatching teams. The first report was 2 crashes at Philadelphia and 2 teams were being dispatched there. When the 8th site came in, the 1 Philadelphia team was reassigned to New York. By 2:20, there were 6 more sites. The NTSB director called her counterpart in Canada. They and their staffs had informally worked several crashes together when one of them knew the other had particular expertise. The Canadian had already seen the destination, knew there were more sites than the American teams, and had started alerting his people on the likelihood they would be called. His 6 teams were only told the Americans may need help and to be ready to go if they were needed. All started packing and many were on their way to the border by 3 o'clock. At that time they were called and 4 teams were asked to head to Detroit, Buffalo, Boston, and Hartford, but hold short of the border for authorization. They were all headed to the border an hour later when they were notified that the President and the Prime Minister had signed orders for them to work as U.S. NTSB teams. Many of them were sitting in restaurants in the border towns when the order came. Each would be assigned a 2-man FBI team to give U.S. authority. The NTSB director also called 7 recently retired people. 5 of them could respond. Most of them were in the Southwest. This team was sent to Albuquerque. The leader of the team called each of them to establish contact and determine ETA. By that time, the NTSB had 9 teams and the 6 Canadian teams. 15 of the 29 sites were being covered. The FBI was assigned to put agents on site at the other 16 to work with local law enforcement to provide security. They were advised to just cordon off the site and provide security, not to do any investigation. They must be careful. Although it was likely all were terrorism, any of the crashes could be an accident. The NTSB director looked at the list. Where could she get 16 more teams? These crashes had to be investigated just as carefully as any. She shuddered. What if they assumed one of these was a missile and it was some aircraft defect that had caused it? They would be condemning another plane load of people to death. No matter what they looked like, these had to be carefully investigated. As she was musing this, her phone rang. It was the head of the Transportation Investigation Bureau in Mexico. He addressed her and then continued. I am sorry to hear this happen in your country. You and your country have my deepest sympathy. Some of my people are not as aware of how good you are to Mexico. If I can be of any help, call me. Thank you so much. It appears I have 50 accident scenes. I have 7 teams and a retired team I have recalled. Canada has called and pledged 6 teams and they are on the way. I cannot pledge teams till I check with my government, but if you think my teams will be of assistance, I will see if I can send them. I have only 3, but if my president will agree, they are yours. I will have to have the president issue an order enabling them. I will check and call you back. Unknown to her at this time, government officials were approaching the U.S. ambassadors in London, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Germany, France, Italy, Finland, Sweden, Japan, and Switzerland. Most were pledging 2 or 3 teams with a total of 23. It wasn't enough, but it was a big help. All of these were good teams. Some may not have the expertise of the best American teams, but they were darn close. As the Mexican teams were being assembled, the leader of the teams read a message from the president. We sometimes look at ourselves as being second-rate. Here is an opportunity for Mexican teams to do the best and let the world see it. I challenge each of you to do the best you can for Mexico, for those who have died, and for those who you may save. By 3 p.m. Eastern, Moussaouf looked at the list that included the information from the networks. He was confirming the numbers from the messages with the media reports. New York, Hartford, Boston, Philadelphia, D.C., Atlanta, Albuquerque, Cincinnati, Tucson, Spokane, LA, San Francisco, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Denver, Detroit, Los Angeles, St. Louis, Atlanta, Miami, Charlotte, Pittsburgh, New Orleans, Buffalo, Portland, Oregon, Columbus, Ohio, Baltimore, Richmond, and Nashville were all reported in. He had no action report from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the media had no report of accidents there. Finally, at 2:31, NBC News reported 2 men were arrested near Harrisburg Airport at 1:30 p.m. They had 2 missiles and were preparing to fire them when a police patrol saw them, stopped, and called for backup. That meant there were only 29 teams. Only one of them was out of action. An NBC expert on Islam counted the sites and cited the attack as using the 29 verses of the Quran that have initials as symbolic for the attack. The explanation was repeated at least 10 times before 4:55 p.m. Eastern when the Santa Fe airport report came in. It was not repeated again. 2 more planes were downed at Santa Fe. There were not 29 teams, there were 30. Mousaf looked at the TV. The Santa Fe team was 3 hours late. How could that happen? He wondered why any planes would be taking off now. They looked at the time of the attacks. The purpose of the coordinated attack was to prevent the Americans from increasing security or shutting down takeoffs. How could they have been 3 hours late? Later it became obvious to Mousaf. The order had said 1:40 EDT. These 2 men had no idea the U.S. had 4 time zones. Fox News had it right, but Mousaf wasn't watching the infidels who hated Allah. For some reason, 2 planes were allowed to take off at Santa Fe at just after 1:40 Pacific time. Most airports had put on full ground stops. Santa Fe had put on a ground stop and then removed it when they had not seen any activity, as had other airports. Later it was learned that one of the aircraft owners wanted to go and bribed a local FAA official to pull the ground stop to allow him to leave. 2 planes took off before the attack was made. The 2 aircraft were targeted and shot down. One was the plane of the man who bribed the official. One of the Mexican teams learned this and reported it. The 2 planes were corporate jets and together carried only 31 people. More than that died on the ground from these 2 crashes. The FAA issued an order at 5:15 p.m. with a mandatory nationwide ground stop. No planes anywhere would be allowed to take off. The failure to do that earlier had resulted in those 31 deaths and 106 more on the ground. Both jets had some control after the missile hit, but turned to the left to land. The one down jet, a 737 that was modified for a corporation, crashed into the side of a school. It was carrying near to the maximum fuel load. In 5 classrooms, 3 on the side the plane crashed into and 2 on the other side, all 63 students and teachers in those rooms died. 10 other students died in the halls. 33 more died when the other jet managed to turn back towards the airport and crashed into a bus and 3 cars on Route 85.